You really shouldn't be here, Maya Johnson said, her voice low and steady, almost swallowed by the sudden crash of her front door, giving way under the force of a hard entry. The sound echoing through the small living room like something final, something irreversible, the frame rattling, dust shaking loose from the ceiling as cold night air rushed in behind the figures now filling her doorway, silhouettes first, then uniforms. Heavy boots stepping across the threshold without hesitation, their presence loud even in silence. Police. One of them announced, clipped and firm, as if the word itself explained everything, justified everything. Maya didn't move, not because she was frozen, but because she was measuring, watching the angles, the distance between each officer, the way the lead one, Ryan Cole, though she didn't say his name yet, held his posture slightly forward, like he expected resistance, like he wanted it. The faint red and blue lights from outside slipped through the broken frame, cutting across the walls in slow pulses, turning the quiet room into something tense, something staged. Her coffee mug sat untouched on the table, steam barely visible now, forgotten in the shift of the moment. "Ma'am, step away from the center of the room," Ryan said, his tone edged with impatience, not loud, but not gentle either, the kind of voice that assumed compliance, expected it. Maya tilted her head slightly, just enough to look at him fully, her expression calm, almost unreadable, which seemed to irritate him more than any argument could have. Behind him, another officer moved toward the hallway, glancing into each doorway as if expecting something to jump out. Drawers opened, cabinets checked, not chaotic, but deliberate, practiced. Maya's gaze followed the movement without turning her body, tracking, calculating. "We received a report," Ryan continued, stepping further into the room, his boots leaving faint marks against the polished wood floor. "You match the description," he added, and there it was, the line that always came too easily, too quickly. Maya let a small breath pass through her nose, not quite a sigh, more like acknowledgement, a description of. "What?" she asked, her voice even, not challenging, not submissive, just precise, the kind of tone that made people listen even when they didn't want to. Ryan hesitated for half a second, barely noticeable, but enough. "Suspicious activity," he said, and it sounded thinner the moment it left his mouth, like it didn't quite hold its own weight. Maya's eyes flicked past him for a fraction of a second, toward the wall behind where the officers now moved, toward something they hadn't noticed yet, something waiting in plain sight, then back to him. "You broke into the wrong home," she said quietly, and this time, there was something underneath it, not anger, not fear, something deeper, something certain. One of the officers paused mid-step, just for a moment, as if something in the air had shifted, but Ryan didn't see it yet, or maybe he refused to. "We'll determine that," he replied, his jaw tightening slightly. The room felt smaller now, tighter, like the walls themselves were holding their breath, and Maya, still standing exactly where she had been when the door came down, didn't raise her voice, didn't move, didn't reach for anything. She simply watched them walk further into a space they didn't understand, her calmness not weakness, but control, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that waits for the exact moment to be seen. The officers moved deeper into the apartment, their presence filling every corner with a quiet tension that did not need raised voices to be felt. One of them sliding open a drawer in the kitchen, another checking the narrow hallway that led to the bedroom, their radios crackling softly with distant chatter that sounded out of place in the stillness of Maya Johnson's home. She remained where she stood, her hands relaxed at her sides, her breathing even, her eyes following each motion with a kind of quiet precision that did not go unnoticed for long. Officer Ryan Cole paused near the edge of the living room, watching her instead of the search, something about her composure pressing against his expectations. People in this situation usually spoke too fast, moved too much, tried to explain themselves before anyone asked, but she did none of that. She simply observed, as if she already understood how this would unfold. "You live here alone?" he asked, his tone less sharp now, but still guarded. Maya shifted her gaze to him, not defensive, not cooperative, just present. "Yes," she answered, her voice steady, the words simple but grounded. One of the officers near the hallway called out, "Clear back here," his voice echoing slightly. Another officer stepped toward a closed cabinet near the far wall, opening it carefully. Inside were neatly arranged folders, a few locked boxes, nothing outwardly alarming. But something about the order of it all seemed to slow him down. He glanced back toward Ryan. Unsure, Ryan gave a small nod, and the officer continued, flipping through a folder without fully understanding what he was looking at. Maya noticed that too, the way they searched without context, without knowing what mattered and what did not. What exactly was the report? She asked after a moment, not to challenge, but to anchor the room in something real. Ryan exhaled lightly through his nose, as if deciding how much to say. Possible illegal activity, he replied, the phrase sounding rehearsed, distant. Maya's eyes held his for a second longer than expected, and something in that silence stretched just enough to make the air feel heavier. You believe that? She asked quietly, not accusing, just curious, and that question landed differently. Not on his authority, but on his judgment. Ryan's jaw tightened slightly, his eyes flicking away for a brief second toward the officers still moving through the space, then back to her. We follow leads, he said, but the certainty in his voice had shifted, just a fraction. One of the officers near the wall suddenly slowed, his flashlight beam tracing upward along the surface, past framed photos, past a shelf lined with books, until it stopped, the light catching on something dark, something structured, hanging perfectly still against the wall. He did not say anything at first, his posture changing before his voice did. The beam stayed there, unmoving, as if confirming what he was seeing. The room seemed to quiet further. Even the radio static faded into the background. Ryan, the officer said finally, his voice lower now, not urgent, but different, carrying a weight that had not been there before. Ryan turned his head slightly, irritation flickering for a moment at the interruption. But then he followed the direction of the light, his eyes narrowing as he stepped closer, each step slower than the last, something unspoken pulling the focus of the entire room toward that one point on the wall. Maya did not turn to look. She already knew what they had found. She had known the moment they crossed the threshold. Her gaze remained on Ryan as he approached, watching not the object, but his reaction to it, the shift, the realization. The exact second when certainty would give way to something else entirely. Ryan Cole stopped 3 feet from the wall, the beam of the flashlight steady now, no longer searching, just holding, revealing. The yellow letters sat against the dark fabric with a clarity that did not leave room for interpretation. FBI. Bold, unmistakable, beneath it a stitched name, precise and official, Special Agent Maya Johnson. The words seemed to pull the air out of the room one slow breath at a time. No one spoke. Not immediately. The officer holding the light shifted his weight slightly, as if unsure whether to lower it or keep it fixed, as if the act of looking had suddenly become something heavier than routine. Ryan's expression tightened, not in anger, but in recalculation, his mind moving faster now, retracing every step, every word, every assumption that had led him through that door. The silence stretched, long enough to feel deliberate, long enough to expose the shift that was happening whether anyone acknowledged it or not. Maya watched him, not the jacket, not the others, just him, her eyes steady, patient, giving him the space to arrive at the truth on his own. Sir, one of the officers said quietly from behind him, but the word did not carry authority anymore. It carried hesitation, uncertainty. Ryan did not respond right away. His gaze moved from the jacket to the wall around it, then to the small details he had ignored before, the organized shelves, the locked cases, the absence of clutter. This was not random. This was structured, intentional. His jaw flexed slightly as he turned back toward Maya, seeing her now not as a subject of a report, but as something else entirely, something he had walked into without understanding. You did not mention this, he said, and the sentence felt incomplete the moment it left his mouth, because he knew she had not been given the chance. Maya tilted her head just a fraction, her expression unchanged. You did not ask, she replied, her tone still calm, still even, but now there was a subtle edge beneath it, not sharp, but undeniable, the kind that came from knowing exactly where one stood. One of the officers near the kitchen slowly closed a drawer he had opened moments ago, the sound soft, almost careful now, as if the space itself demanded a different kind of respect. Another officer stepped back from the hallway, his posture less rigid, his movements more measured. The energy in the room had shifted completely, no longer driven by urgency, but by awareness. Ryan took a slow breath, his shoulders lowering slightly, the tension in his stance loosening just enough to show the internal shift. He glanced once more at the jacket, then back at Maya, and for the first time since entering, his voice changed, the edge softened, replaced by something closer to restraint. "We received a call," he said, more deliberate now, as if choosing each word with care. It indicated illegal activity at this address. Maya nodded once, a small, controlled motion. "Yes," she said, and that single word landed differently than anything before it. Not defensive, not surprised, but confirming. Ryan's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in focus. "You were aware of this?" he asked, and now the question carried weight, because it implied something larger than a mistake. Maya held his gaze, unflinching. "I was expecting attention," she answered, her voice steady, and the room seemed to hold still around that statement. One officer shifted again, glancing between them, trying to understand what was unfolding beyond the surface. Ryan took a step closer, slower this time. No force, no urgency, just intent. "Attention from who?" he asked. And this time, there was no assumption in his tone, only the need to know. Maya's eyes flicked briefly toward the door they had forced open, then back to him. "That depends," she said quietly, "on how much you actually want the truth." And in that moment, the balance in the room changed completely, not with movement, not with sound, but with the realization that this was never just about her. And it never had been. Ryan Cole did not answer right away, the question lingering in the air between them like something heavier than it should have been, his eyes searching Maya Johnson's face for any sign of hesitation, any crack that might give him something to hold on to. But there was none, just that same steady composure, the kind that did not come from confidence alone, but from certainty. Behind him, one of the officers shifted his stance, glancing toward the open door where the night air still slipped in, carrying the faint hum of distant traffic and the soft rotation of red and blue lights across the walls. The room felt smaller now, not physically, but in the way tension compresses space. Ryan finally spoke, slower this time, more deliberate. "If there is something we need to know, now would be the time." His voice had lost its earlier edge, replaced by something more controlled, more cautious. Maya's gaze did not waver. "There has been something you needed to know for a while," she said quietly, and that sentence did not land like information, it landed like a weight. Ryan's brow tightened slightly, a flicker of unease passing through his expression before he masked it. "Then explain it," he replied. But even he could hear the shift in his own tone. It was no longer an order, it was a request dressed as one. Maya took a slow breath, not to steady herself, but as if marking a transition, a line being crossed. "You said you follow leads," she began, her voice even, measured. "But have you ever asked who creates them?" The question settled into the room, not loud, not dramatic, just precise. One of the officers near the kitchen glanced at Ryan, then back at Maya, unsure whether to continue moving or to stay still. Ryan's jaw set. "We respond to credible information," he said, but the words felt thinner now, like they had already been tested and found lacking. Maya nodded once, acknowledging the statement without agreeing to it. "Credible to who?" she asked, and this time there was no space to deflect, no easy answer waiting. The silence that followed was not empty. It was active, pressing, forcing attention where it had been avoided before. Ryan exhaled slowly, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied her, not as a suspect, but as a source. "You are saying this was not random," he said, and now the question carried a different kind of weight. Maya's lips pressed together briefly, not in hesitation, but in consideration. "Nothing about tonight was random," she replied, her voice steady, the certainty in it impossible to ignore. One of the officers near the wall took a small step back, his gaze drifting once more to the jacket, then to Maya, as if trying to reconcile the two images into one understanding. Ryan felt the shift fully. Now, not just in the room, but in himself, the assumptions he had walked in with no longer holding their shape. "Then why us?" he asked, and this time the question was not defensive, it was direct. Maya's eyes held his, unwavering. "Because you were supposed to come," she said, and that sentence changed everything. The air seemed to tighten again, but in a different way now, not with pressure, but with realization. Ryan's posture straightened slightly, not out of authority, but out of awareness. "That is not how this works," he said. Though the certainty behind it was already fading, Maya's expression softened just a fraction, not with sympathy, but with clarity. "That is exactly how this works," she replied, her voice calm, grounded. "You just were not meant to see it from this side." The words settled into him, not as an argument, but as a shift in perspective he had not prepared for. The room remained still. Every movement slowed, every sound reduced, as if the moment itself demanded attention. And for the first time since stepping through that door, Ryan Cole realized that he had not entered a situation. He had stepped into something already in motion, something larger than a call, larger than a report, and now, whether he wanted to or not, he was part of it. Ryan Cole felt the shift settle deeper into his chest, not like fear, but like something heavier, something that did not move easily once it landed. He glanced briefly toward the open doorway again, the flashing lights outside now feeling less like authority and more like exposure, like a signal that this moment was no longer contained. He turned back to Maya Johnson, studying her with a different kind of focus now, not searching for mistakes, but trying to understand the pattern she had already seen. "If this was meant to happen," he said slowly, choosing each word with care, "then someone wanted us here." The statement was not a question, but it carried one underneath it. Maya nodded once, her expression steady. "Yes," she said. Simple, direct. Ryan's eyes narrowed slightly, his mind moving through possibilities, connections forming and breaking just as quickly. "And that someone is not you," he added, testing the ground. Maya held his gaze without hesitation. "If I wanted you here," she replied, "you would have been called differently." The sentence landed with quiet precision. One of the officers behind Ryan shifted again, his earlier confidence replaced with a subtle unease, as if the rules he had been operating under no longer applied in the same way. Ryan absorbed that, letting it settle, then moved one step closer, not aggressive, not forceful, but intentional. "Then who set this up?" he asked, and now there was no authority in his tone, only the need for clarity. Maya's eyes flicked briefly toward the hallway, then back to him, as if measuring how much to reveal, how far to let him step into something he did not yet fully understand. "You said you follow leads," she said again, her voice calm. "Tonight, you became one." The words landed heavier than anything before them. Ryan felt it immediately. The implication, the shift in position, not just in the room, but in the entire situation. "That does not make sense," he said, but the resistance in his voice was thinner now, more reflex than belief. Maya tilted her head slightly, her expression unchanged. "It will," she answered, quietly. "Once you stop looking at this like a routine call." The room held still around them, every officer now aware that something had moved beyond their control, beyond their training. Ryan exhaled slowly, his gaze dropping for a brief second as he recalculated, then lifting again to meet hers. "You are saying we were directed here on purpose," he said, and now the statement carried weight, because he was beginning to believe it. Maya nodded again, a small, controlled motion. "Yes," she said, then after a brief pause, "And not just you." Ryan's brow tightened, the second part of that sentence catching his attention immediately. "What do you mean, not just us?" he asked, and this time there was no attempt to mask the concern beneath the question. Maya did not answer right away. Instead she listened, her head turning slightly toward the open doorway, toward the faint sound that had just entered the edge of the moment, distant at first, but growing, a second set of sirens. Different in tone, sharper, more precise, not the wide sweep of patrol lights, but something more focused, more deliberate. One of the officers near the door turned his head as well, his posture stiffening as he recognized the sound. Ryan followed their gaze, his body turning just enough to look past the broken frame and into the street beyond. The flashing lights were multiplying now, layering over each other in overlapping colors. The quiet street no longer quiet, the air shifting again, but this time not from inside the room. Maya's voice came softly behind him, steady as ever. "That would be them," she said, and Ryan did not need to ask who she meant. Because in that moment, as the new lights washed over the doorway and into the space they had already disturbed, he understood that whatever had started before he arrived had just reached its next step, and he was no longer the one in control of how it unfolded. The second set of sirens grew louder, sharper, cutting through the night. With a precision that felt intentional, not reactive, Ryan Cole stepped just outside the broken doorway, the cool air hitting his face as he looked down the street. Two dark vehicles rolled in without urgency, but with purpose, their lights flashing in tight, controlled patterns, not wide, not chaotic, the kind of presence that did not need to announce itself loudly to be understood. One of his officers moved beside him, voice low, uncertain. "That is not local." Ryan did not respond, his eyes fixed on the vehicles as they came to a smooth stop along the curb, doors opening in near silence, figures stepping out in dark jackets, their movements coordinated, deliberate, each step measured. Back inside, Maya Johnson had not moved. She stood in the same spot, her posture relaxed but grounded, as if she had been here before, as if this exact moment had already played out in her mind long before it became real. One of the approaching agents walked toward the house, his gaze sweeping once across the scene, taking in the broken door, the officers inside, the stillness of the room, then settling briefly on Maya. A recognition passing between them that did not need words. Ryan stepped back inside as the man reached the doorway, the shift in authority immediate, even without a single command being spoken. "Officer Cole," the man said calmly, his voice even, controlled, not confrontational, but firm in a way that left no doubt. Ryan straightened slightly, instinctively. "Yes," he replied, his tone more measured now. The man stepped just inside, his presence quiet but definitive. "We will take it from here," he said, not as a suggestion, not as a request, but as a transition that had already been decided. Ryan's jaw tightened for a brief second, the reflex to question rising and then stopping just short. He glanced once at Maya, then back at the man. "On what grounds?" he asked, the question careful, not challenging, but necessary. The man held his gaze, steady, unblinking. "Federal jurisdiction," he replied. Simple, direct. The room seemed to settle into that answer. One of Ryan's officers shifted behind him, lowering his stance slightly, the earlier tension replaced with a quiet awareness of boundaries being redrawn. Ryan nodded once, slowly, accepting the shift even if he did not fully understand it yet. The agent turned slightly toward Maya, his posture easing just enough to acknowledge her presence without diminishing it. "Agent Johnson," he said, and the title landed differently now, no longer hidden, no longer implied, but clear, defined. Maya gave a small nod in return, her expression unchanged. "You are right on time," she said, her voice calm, the words carrying a meaning that extended beyond the moment. Ryan watched that exchange closely, something in it confirming what he had already begun to realize. This had never been about a report, never about a call. He had stepped into an operation already in motion, and he had not been invited to understand it until now. The agent shifted his attention back to Ryan. "We appreciate your cooperation," he said, and the phrasing was polite, but final. Ryan exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering slightly as he stepped back, creating space, not just physically, but in acknowledgement. One by one, his officers followed, their movements quieter now, more restrained. The room that had felt controlled when they entered now belonged to someone else entirely. Ryan took one last look at Maya, not as a suspect, not even as an equal, but as someone who had been ahead of him from the very beginning. And for the first time since the night began, he understood that what he had seen so far was only the surface, and whatever came next was already unfolding. Whether he was part of it or not, the room did not return to normal after the agents entered. It settled into something quieter, more deliberate, like every movement now had a purpose that no one questioned. Agent Johnson stepped forward at last, not rushed, not dramatic, just a simple shift of weight that carried authority without needing to announce it. Ryan Cole remained near the edge of the space, no longer directing anything, but not fully removed either, caught between roles he had not expected to change so quickly. The lead federal agent glanced around once more, his eyes taking in the broken frame of the door, the displaced air, the officers who now stood back instead of forward. Then he turned to Maya. "We have confirmation," he said, his tone low enough to stay contained within the room, but clear enough to carry meaning. Maya gave a slight nod, as if that outcome had never been in doubt. "Timing?" she asked, her voice just as controlled. The agent checked a small device in his hand, then looked back up. "Within minutes," he replied, and that answer shifted something again, not visibly, but internally, the kind of shift that changes how every second feels. Ryan watched the exchange, his mind working through what little he had. "What exactly is about to happen?" he asked, and this time there was no edge, no resistance, just the need to understand where he stood. The agent looked at him briefly, measuring how much to say, then back at Maya, as if deferring the choice to her. She held Ryan's gaze for a moment, then spoke. "There is a leak," she said. Simple, direct, not outside, inside. The words landed with quiet precision. Ryan's expression tightened slightly, the implication immediate. "Inside where?" he asked, though part of him already knew the direction of the answer. Maya did not soften it, did not redirect it. "Inside your department," she said, and the silence that followed was heavier than anything before it. One of the officers behind Ryan shifted uncomfortably, the weight of that statement pressing against everyone in the room. Ryan's jaw flexed, his eyes flicking briefly toward his own team, then back to her. "That is a serious claim," he said, but the firmness in his voice was tempered by the fact that he had already begun to suspect something was off long before this moment. Maya nodded once, acknowledging the gravity without stepping back from it. "That is why it had to be handled this way," she replied, her voice steady. "Controlled, observed, documented." Each word placed carefully, as if building a structure Ryan could finally see. The agent beside her added quietly, "Your response tonight was part of that observation." And that sentence shifted Ryan's understanding again, not just of the situation, but of his role in it. He had not just responded to a call, he had been part of something designed to reveal how he would act under pressure, how he would interpret limited information, how he would treat someone he believed had no power. The realization settled slowly, but completely. Ryan exhaled, his shoulders lowering just slightly, not in defeat, but in recognition. "And what did you learn?" he asked, the question directed at Maya now, not defensive, not confrontational, just honest. Maya studied him for a brief moment, her eyes steady, weighing not just his words, but everything that had come before them. "Enough," she said quietly, and that answer did not accuse, did not condemn, but it did not excuse either. It simply acknowledged that the moment had revealed what it needed to reveal. Outside, the sound of movement increased, doors opening and closing, voices low but coordinated, something larger unfolding beyond the walls of the apartment. Ryan glanced once more toward the doorway, then back at Maya, understanding now that this night was not about a single mistake. It was about a system being tested, and whether it would hold or break depended on what came next, and for the first time, he was not sure which side of that outcome he stood on. Ryan Cole felt the weight of Maya Johnson's answer settled deeper than he expected, not sharp, not immediate, but steady, like something that would not leave once it found its place. The room around him continued moving in controlled silence, federal agents stepping in and out with quiet coordination, voices low, purposeful, every action aligned with something already decided before he ever arrived. He watched as one agent moved toward the hallway with a tablet in hand, another speaking softly into a radio. Their words too low to fully catch, but structured enough to signal precision. Nothing about this was improvised. Nothing about it was uncertain. Ryan shifted his stance slightly, the familiar ground of authority no longer beneath him, replaced by something unfamiliar, observation instead of control. He glanced toward his own officers, their posture different now, less rigid, more aware, each of them sensing the shift even if they did not fully understand it. "If there is a leak," Ryan said, after a moment, his voice measured, careful, "then you already know who it is." The statement was quiet but direct. Maya turned her attention fully to him, her expression unchanged, but her eyes sharper now, more focused. "We know patterns," she replied, her tone calm. "Behavior, timing, decisions." She paused briefly, letting the words settle. "But patterns do not become proof until someone confirms them." Ryan absorbed that slowly, the implication forming clearly now. And tonight was confirmation, he said, not as a question, but as a realization. Maya gave a slight nod, acknowledging the truth of it without adding anything unnecessary. One of the agents stepped closer, lowering his voice as he spoke to her. "We are in position," he said quietly. Maya listened, then responded just as softly, "Hold until signal." The exchange was brief, but it carried weight, direction. Ryan watched closely, the pieces aligning in a way that made his earlier certainty feel distant, incomplete. He took a slow breath, then asked the question that had been building since the moment the second sirens arrived. "Where does that leave us?" he said, and this time there was no trace of defensiveness, only the need to understand his place in something larger than himself. Maya studied him for a moment, not his uniform, not his rank, but him, the choices he had made, the tone he had used, the restraint he had shown once the situation shifted. "That depends on what you do next," she answered, her voice steady. Ryan held her gaze, not looking away this time, not retreating. "And what would you have me do?" he asked. The question simple, but genuine. Maya's expression softened just slightly, not with emotion, but with clarity. "Stay exactly where you are," she said, "and watch." The instruction was quiet, but firm. Outside, the movement intensified again, footsteps quick but controlled, doors closing, voices aligning, something approaching its next point. Ryan turned his head slightly toward the doorway, the flashing lights casting layered reflections across the floor, then back to Maya, understanding now that this moment was not about stepping forward, not about taking control, but about seeing clearly for the first time, the kind of clarity that could not be forced, only revealed. The room held its breath in a way that felt almost deliberate, every second stretching just enough to make what came next matter. And Ryan Cole, who had entered believing he understood the situation, now stood still, exactly where he had been told, waiting, watching, knowing that whatever happened in the next few moments would decide far more than just the outcome of a single night. The room held a kind of silence that did not feel empty, but loaded, as if every second carried weight waiting to be released. Ryan Cole stood exactly where Maya Johnson had told him, not out of obedience, but because something in him understood that moving too soon would mean missing what mattered. Outside the doorway, the controlled motion of federal agents continued, shadows crossing through the layered red and blue lights, voices low, coordinated. Then a new sound entered the space, not loud, not chaotic, but distinct, a single car door closing with precision, followed by footsteps approaching at a measured pace. Ryan's eyes shifted toward the entrance, his body still, his attention sharpened. The footsteps did not rush. They did not hesitate. They arrived. A figure appeared at the threshold, not in uniform, not marked by flashing lights, but carrying presence in a different way, calm, composed, deliberate, the kind of presence that did not need to assert itself to be recognized. The agents inside adjusted subtly, not stepping back, but aligning, creating a path without being told. Maya's gaze moved to the doorway, her expression unchanged, but her focus absolute. The man stepped inside, his eyes scanning once, taking in the broken door, the officers, the positioning of every person in the room, then settling on Maya. A brief pause, just long enough to acknowledge what needed no explanation. "Agent Johnson," he said, his voice even, grounded. She gave a slight nod in return. "You are right on time," she replied again. But this time the words carried completion, not anticipation. Ryan watched the exchange closely. Something in it final, something that marked a shift from preparation to execution. The man turned his attention slightly, his gaze moving past Ryan's shoulder, landing on one of the officers standing just a few feet behind him. A man who until now had said nothing, had moved like the others, had blended into the structure of the team without drawing attention. Ryan felt it before he understood it, the subtle tension in the room tightening around that one point. The officer shifted, just slightly, not enough to alarm, but enough to register. The man at the doorway spoke again, calm, controlled. "We need to talk," he said, not to the room, not to the group, but directly to that one officer. The air changed instantly, not with noise, but with focus. Every presence in the room narrowing toward that exchange. Ryan turned his head slowly, his eyes landing on the officer he had worked beside countless times, someone he trusted without question until this moment. Something about the way the officer held his stance now felt different, not wrong, but guarded in a way that had not been visible before. Maya stepped forward for the first time since the agents arrived, not fast, not aggressive, just enough to shift her position into clearer view, her voice calm, but firm. "It is over," she said, and the simplicity of the statement carried more weight than any accusation could have. The officer's jaw tightened slightly, his eyes flicking between Ryan, the man at the doorway, and Maya, calculating, adjusting. The room remained still, no sudden movements, no raised voices, just the quiet unfolding of something that had been building long before this night. Ryan felt the realization settle fully now, not as a possibility, but as truth. The leak was not an idea, not a pattern. It was a person, someone who had stood beside him, moved with him, responded with him, and now stood exposed not by force, but by design, by patience, by watching. And as the silence stretched, the outcome already written in the structure of the moment, Ryan understood that what he was witnessing was not just the end of an operation, but the beginning of something that would change how he saw every decision he made from this point forward. The officer did not move at first, not when the attention shifted, not when the man at the doorway spoke, not even when Maya Johnson said it was over. He simply stood there, shoulders squared, posture controlled, but something beneath that control had changed, something subtle, something that Ryan Cole felt more than saw, like a familiar rhythm suddenly off by half a beat. The room remained still, every presence aware of the shift without rushing to act on it. The man at the doorway took one step closer, slow, measured, his voice calm but carrying a weight that did not need volume. "You have had time," he said, not accusing, not aggressive, just stating a fact that hung in the air between them. The officer finally exhaled, a small, controlled breath, his eyes lowering for a fraction of a second before lifting again, not to Ryan, but to Maya. And in that glance there was something that had not been visible before, not fear, not guilt in the obvious sense, but recognition, as if he understood that the moment he had been avoiding had finally arrived. Ryan watched him closely, his mind moving through memories, conversations, small details that had never seemed important until now. The late responses, the quiet hesitations, the patterns that only made sense when seen from this angle. "Say something," Ryan said, his voice low, not demanding, but grounded in something personal now, something that went beyond procedure. The officer's jaw tightened slightly, his hands remaining still at his sides. No sudden movements, no escalation, just a man standing in the center of a moment that had already been decided. "It was not supposed to be like this," he said finally, his voice controlled, but carrying a weight that could not be hidden. The words landed softly, but they changed the air in the room, not because they were dramatic, but because they confirmed what no one had wanted to say out loud. Maya did not react outwardly, her posture unchanged, her eyes steady. "It never is," she replied quietly, and there was no judgment in her tone, just truth, the kind that did not need to be emphasized to be understood. The man at the doorway stepped slightly to the side, creating space without force, an opening rather than a push. The officer glanced toward it, then back at Ryan, and for a brief moment something passed between them, not spoken, not defined, but clear, the weight of shared time, shared trust, now fractured by a reality that could not be undone. Ryan felt it fully now, not as anger, not as betrayal in the loud sense, but as something quieter, heavier, the realization that he had missed what had been right in front of him, that he had trusted without questioning, that he had followed without seeing. The officer straightened slightly, not resisting, not stepping forward yet, just aligning himself with the moment. "What happens now?" Ryan asked, his voice steady, directed not at the officer, but at Maya, because he understood now where the answers came from. Maya held his gaze for a second, then spoke with the same calm certainty she had carried from the beginning. "Now the truth moves forward," she said, and the simplicity of it carried more weight than any explanation could have. The officer took a slow step toward the space that had been made, not rushed, not forced, just accepted, The agents adjusted around him with quiet precision. No raised voices, no sudden action, just a transition from one state to another, controlled, deliberate, final. Ryan remained where he stood, watching it unfold, understanding that this was not about punishment, not in this moment. It was about exposure, about clarity, about seeing something as it truly was instead of how it appeared. And as the officer moved past him, no longer part of his team in the way he had been minutes before, Ryan felt the shift settle completely. The end of one understanding, and the beginning of something far more complicated. Something that would not leave easily, because once seen, it could not be unseen. The movement in the room continued with quiet precision as the officer stepped fully into the space created for him. No resistance, no sudden gestures, just a controlled acceptance that felt heavier than any struggle could have been. Ryan Cole watched every step, every shift in posture, the familiar now turning unfamiliar in real time. The man he had trusted now moving under a different authority, under a different truth. The agents adjusted around him, their positions deliberate, not surrounding, not pressing, but guiding, containing the moment without escalating it. Maya Johnson remained still, her presence unchanged, her attention steady, not on the agents, not even on the officer, but on the space between all of them, the structure of what had just unfolded. Ryan felt something tighten in his chest, not anger, not exactly, something closer to recognition, the kind that comes when a line you did not see before suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. "You could have told me," Ryan said quietly. The words directed at the officer, but carrying more than accusation. There was weight in them, history. The officer paused for a fraction of a second, just enough to acknowledge the statement without turning back. "I could not," he replied, his voice steady, not defensive, not apologetic, just honest in a way that made the truth harder to dismiss. Ryan exhaled slowly, his gaze dropping briefly to the floor, then lifting again, searching for something that was no longer there. "You chose not to," he said, and this time the words carried a different edge, not sharp, but grounded. The officer stopped completely now, turning just enough to meet Ryan's eyes. And in that moment, everything unspoken between them became clear. "I chose what I thought was right," he said, and there was no hesitation in it, no uncertainty, just a conviction that did not match the reality now standing around him. Maya's voice entered the space again, calm, steady, but firm enough to settle the tension before it could grow. "Intent does not change impact," she said, her eyes on the officer, not harsh, not condemning, but clear, the kind of clarity that leaves no room for argument. The officer held her gaze for a moment, then looked away, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. The man at the doorway nodded slightly, a signal more than a command, and the agents resumed their quiet movement, guiding the officer toward the exit, step by step, controlled, deliberate, final. Ryan remained where he stood, watching as the moment closed around him, the distance between what he believed and what had been revealed stretching wider with each second. The sound of footsteps faded slightly as they moved beyond the doorway, replaced again by the low hum of the night, the flashing lights still painting the edges of the room in shifting color. Maya finally shifted her stance, just slightly, her eyes moving from the doorway back to Ryan. And for the first time since everything had begun, there was something softer in her expression, not sympathy, not exactly, but understanding. "You did not miss everything," she said quietly, and the words landed differently than anything before them. Ryan looked at her, the tension in his shoulders easing just enough to let the statement settle. "Then what did I see?" he asked, his voice low, no longer searching for control, only for truth. Maya held his gaze, steady, grounded. "You saw the moment it changed," she replied, and in that answer was something deeper than explanation, something that suggested that this night was not just an ending, but a turning point, one that would stay with him long after the lights outside disappeared and the door was repaired, because once a person sees clearly, even for a moment, they cannot return to seeing the same way again. The room felt different now, not because of who had left, but because of what remained. The tension had not disappeared. It had transformed into something quieter, something more reflective. The flashing lights outside had begun to fade, their rhythm slower now as the vehicles shifted position down the street, the sharp urgency replaced by a controlled withdrawal. Ryan Cole stood near the center of the room, his posture no longer rigid, but not relaxed either, caught in the space between what he had believed and what he now understood. Maya Johnson moved toward the wall where the jacket still hung, her steps soft, measured, as if returning something to its place without needing to touch it. Her fingers brushed lightly against the fabric, not adjusting it, just acknowledging it. The symbol no longer hidden, no longer misunderstood. Ryan watched her, the question still lingering in his mind, not about the operation, not about the outcome, but about the space between them. You knew this. What happened? He said quietly, not accusing, not even questioning, just stating what had become clear. Maya did not turn immediately, her gaze resting on the jacket for a moment longer before shifting back to him. I knew it was possible, she replied, her voice calm, grounded. Ryan nodded slowly, absorbing the distinction, possibility versus certainty, preparation versus control. The difference mattered more now than it ever had before. And if it had gone differently? He asked, his voice lower, more personal. Maya held his gaze, steady. Then I would have adjusted, she said simply. And there was something in that answer that settled deeper than strategy, something about responsibility, about being ready for outcomes that could not be fully predicted. Ryan exhaled slowly, his shoulders easing just a fraction, the weight of the night not gone, but understood in a way that made it easier to carry. One of his officers stepped quietly toward the doorway, glancing back once as if waiting for direction. Ryan met his eyes and gave a small nod, not an order, not a command, just acknowledgement. The officer turned and stepped outside, joining the others as they began to clear the scene. The sound of their movement softer now, more measured. The earlier urgency replaced with quiet completion. Maya remained where she was, her presence steady, no longer at the center of action, but still at the center of understanding. Ryan took a step closer, not invading her space, but closing the distance just enough to speak without raising his voice. You could have let this play out without us, he said, and there was no edge to it, just curiosity. Maya considered that for a moment, her eyes steady. No, she replied, her voice soft but firm. This only works if people choose what they do when they think no one is watching. The words settled into him, not as criticism, but as truth, the kind that reveals more than it explains. Ryan looked down briefly, then back at her, the weight of that statement finding its place. So tonight was not just about him, he said, referring without naming. Maya gave a slight nod. It was about the system around him, she answered, her tone even. And whether it bends or holds when it matters. Ryan felt something shift again, not in the room, but in himself, the understanding that this night had not been an isolated event, but a lens, a way of seeing. Things that had always been there, but had never been fully examined. The last of the flashing lights outside dimmed further as the vehicles began to pull away, leaving the street quieter, more ordinary, as if nothing significant had happened at all. But inside, nothing felt the same. Ryan looked around the room one more time. The broken door, the disturbed space, the jacket on the wall, all of it part of a moment that would not fade as easily as the lights outside. He turned back to Maya, his voice quieter now, but steady. What happens next? He asked. Not about procedure, not about reports, but about something larger. Maya met his gaze, her expression calm, grounded. That depends on what you carry from this, she said. And in that answer was no instruction, no directive, just a choice. One that did not belong to her, one that never had. And as the last sound of engines faded into the distance, leaving only the quiet hum of the night behind, Ryan Cole understood that the next step was not written anywhere. It would be decided by what he chose to see when the moment was no longer in front of him. The night settled back into silence, one layer at a time. The distant hum of engines gone, the flashing lights no longer painting the walls, leaving behind only the stillness of a space that had been seen too clearly to feel ordinary again. Ryan Cole stood near the doorway, the broken frame casting uneven shadows across the floor, a reminder that something had entered this place with force, but what remained was something quieter, something harder to define. Maya Johnson moved slowly through the room, not cleaning, not restoring, just resetting the small details. A chair nudged back into place, a drawer closed with care, movements that did not erase what happened, but acknowledged that life would continue around it. Ryan watched her for a moment, the contrast between the disruption and her calm presence settling into him. "You are not going to fix the door tonight," he said quietly, the words more observation than question. Maya glanced toward the frame, then back at him. "Some things are better left visible for a while," she replied, her tone steady, and the meaning reached further than the wood and hinges. Ryan nodded slowly, understanding that some breaks were not meant to be hidden immediately, that sometimes they served a purpose simply by being seen. He stepped slightly to the side, giving space, not out of instruction, but out of respect that had not been there when he arrived. "I came in here thinking I knew what this was," he said, his voice low, carrying the weight of everything that had unfolded. Maya did not interrupt. She simply listened, the way she had from the beginning. "I thought I was responding to something wrong," he continued, pausing briefly as he searched for the right words. "I did not realize I was walking into something that was already right in a way I could not see yet." Maya held his gaze, her expression calm, not validating, not dismissing, just present. "Most people do not," she said softly, and there was no judgment in it, only truth. Ryan exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just enough to feel the difference. He looked around the room once more, the quiet now carrying a different weight, not pressure, but clarity, the kind that stays long after the moment passes. "You could have shut me down the second I stepped in," he said, and this time there was a hint of something else in his voice, not regret, but awareness. Maya's eyes flicked briefly toward the door, then back to him. "But then you would have left the same way you came," she replied, her words measured, each one landing exactly where it needed to. Ryan nodded once, accepting that, understanding that the experience itself had been the point, not just the outcome. The room fell quiet again, not empty, but complete, as if everything that needed to be said had already found its place. Maya walked back toward the wall, her hand resting lightly against the jacket once more, not as a symbol of authority, but as a reminder of responsibility. Ryan followed her movement with his eyes, then looked down briefly, then back. Up. Something settled now, something steady. "I will not see it the same again," he said, not as a promise, not as a declaration, but as a simple truth. Maya did not respond immediately. She just gave a small nod, acknowledging what did not need to be expanded. The night outside remained quiet, the street returning to its usual rhythm, unaware of what had shifted inside these walls. Ryan turned toward the doorway, pausing for a brief second before stepping out, the cool air meeting him again, different now, clearer somehow. He glanced back once, not at the damage, not at the space, but at Maya, standing exactly where she had been when everything began, unchanged in a way that made everything else feel transformed. And as he stepped fully into the night, the silence behind him settled into something final, not an ending, but a quiet understanding that would follow him long after this moment faded. Because she had not raised her voice, she had not forced control, but she had shown him something deeper, something he could not ignore anymore, what authority really looked like.